Hi folks, I'm Jeff Gonzales, president of Trident Concepts, and I'm here today with CCW Safe to talk to you about my new book, The Concealed Carry Manual. What I really want to do is I want to talk to you about one of the chapters from within that book. And this chapter is one that is kind of important to me, which is purpose. What is the purpose for carrying concealed? And there's a lot of reasons, and we can get really deep into the weeds on this, so I want to try to keep it just at the surface level. So the first thing for me is that I value life. I value my life, I value your life, I value my children's life, my family's lives. I put a high premium on that. So I'm willing to protect that life at all costs in some cases. So, and we'll talk about that in just a second, what that really means. So the first thing that I talk about with regards to purpose is, valuing life. That's the bedrock that we need to start from. From there, I always ask people, okay, first of all, if not you, then who? If you're not willing to protect yourself or protect your family, then who is going to do it? Yes, of course, you can point to law enforcement, and that is a viable option, but we then go back to response time and how that all interacts. And it's much easier to carry a firearm than to try to carry a police officer. So with that being said, what do you stand to lose? That's the key thing. If you don't do something, if you don't take action to confront this violence, well, what do you stand to lose? Now, a lot of times there are some folks that will encourage you to cooperate or to capitulate or to whatever, surrender, however you want to look at it. And those might well be your only options. Or I should say maybe those are an option, but they're probably not your only option. But they were your only option because you never really pursued or considered the importance behind carrying a firearm and all the other things that go with it. So I always try to remind people that, if not you, then who? And what do you stand to lose if you don't take action? I mean, there's a lot of unknowns here. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's no guarantee that things are going to go your way, but at least you doing something pushes you in that direction. And I always try to remind people about crime scene number 2. What is crime scene number 2? Well, crime scene number 1 is where the act initially began, right? Crime scene number 2, there is like some ridiculously high percentage of fatalities as a result of getting to crime scene number 2. So what that means is that you were grabbed, you were kidnapped, you were taken at gunpoint, knife point, against your will from crime scene number 1 to crime scene number 2. And once you're at crime scene number 2, your survival rate plummets, right? So what do you do in between crime scene number 1 and crime scene number 2? How do you manage all this? So that's an important distinction that people need to kind of take into consideration. The next thing that I talk about is a violent response does not make you a violent person. And there's a big kind of like disconnect there. And I try to emphasize to people that, doing what you have to do to protect yourself doesn't make you a bad person. Just like using violence to counter violence doesn't make you a violent person. The distinction is there, but a lot of times we sometimes fail to see that. So make sure you understand that. Make sure you recognize the difference there. And that kind of leads us up to the next part, which is, a firearm is not a deterrent. I don't want folks to have this grandiose or misconception of what a firearm can and can't do. Number one, we have to understand what brandishing a weapon is. And if you don't know what brandishing a weapon is, there's some homework assignments for you. Understand what brandishing a firearm means. The mere presence of a firearm is not always a deterrent, and you should never think of it as a deterrent. So in other words, if you decide to draw your firearm from concealed carry and you were doing it in an essence to try to intimidate or scare the violent criminal actor, that's not a good strategy at all. It's a very bad strategy. In fact, it's also illegal because it's potentially brandishing a firearm. So let's not go down that road of considering a firearm as a deterrent. A firearm is a tool that you will use to counter a violent criminal act. And the last thing that I talk about is, and a lot of times I have students that come to me that have had a lot of discussions. They've been kind of wavering back and forth because they struggle with these concepts sometimes. And it's totally normal as humans to have these types of aversions or these concerns or this anxiety about what we're talking about. It's perfectly normal, which is why it's important to talk about it. But the way that I look at it and what has helped other people to accept the consequences, if you will, is that in order for me to protect my life or my family's life, I may have to take another life. So to protect life might mean that I have to take life. And that's a discussion that you have to have with yourself and a decision that you have to make for yourself, that you would be willing, worst case scenario, because not everything ends in deadly force, but you have to have that conversation early on, that should the situation reach a point where deadly force is necessary, then you have already had this discussion with yourself about what you're willing to do to protect your life and to protect your family's life. So some very difficult subjects that can sometimes put us in a position of feeling uncomfortable about all of this. And this is one of the barriers to entry for a lot of people that are considering the possibility of carrying a firearm. Having these discussions and these conversations will help you root out your ultimate decision about what you're going to do. But it'll come from a position of an informed choice versus a knee-jerk reaction, or even worse, an uninformed choice. I'm Jeff Gonzales, and if you have questions about the book, you can go to the website, concealedcarrymanual.com, to learn more, or feel free to post some questions down below. Be happy to answer them. Until then, take care, stay safe.